Here's a thing nobody tells you about a dying ranch. It doesn't die loud. It dies the way a coal goes out slow from the edges in, until one morning you put your hand near it expecting heat and there's just gray. That's what my place was the summer she walked up my road. Gray at the edges. And I was too tired and too broke to be anything but honest with the woman who came asking for work. So when she asked, I told her the truth. I had nothing to pay her. No money, no crew, no future she'd want a share of. I had $11, a lame horse, a bank man coming in 9 days, and a debt so deep I'd stopped writing the number down because seeing it made my hand shake. And then I heard myself say the thing that I have spent the rest of my life trying to understand. I said, marry me before sunset. I don't know which of us was more surprised, but she didn't run. That's the part I keep coming back to all these years later when the light goes long across the yard the way it did that evening. She didn't run. Let me tell you how a man gets to a place where a sentence like that falls out of him. Let me tell you about her. And let me tell you, because I owe her this, I owe her the whole truth, how badly I nearly ruined it before it began. The dust came up the road before she did. I saw it from the porch where I was sitting with my ledger open on my knee, doing the arithmetic I did every morning that summer, which was the arithmetic of a man counting the days he had left. I keep a ledger, always have. My father kept one before me, and he used to say a man who won't write down what he owes is a man who's already decided to lie about it. So I write it all down. Feed, water, debts, whether the small deaths and the smaller mercies. That morning the page said, Aug 14, 2 eggs, Colt still favoring the off 4. Rain, none, days till Harmon, 9. Harmon was the bank man. 9 days was what I had. The dust resolved into a figure walking. Not riding, walking, which meant either poor or proud or both, and out here it was usually both. A woman. She carried a bundle wrapped in a striped blanket, and she walked like her feet hurt, but she decided not to let that be my business. When she got close enough, I saw she was Apache. Chiricahua, I'd learn later, though that morning all I registered was the set of her jaw and the way she looked at my sorry excuse for a ranch. The sagging barn, the empty corrals, the one lame horse, and did not let her face say what she thought of it. You the owner? She asked. What's left of him? She didn't smile. I didn't blame her. I'm looking for work. I can handle cattle, mend fence, break a horse gentle. I don't eat much and I don't complain. I want to tell you I was gracious. I wasn't. I was a proud, frightened man watching his father's ranch slip through his fingers, and pride and fear make a mean animal out of a decent one. I looked at her, a lone Apache woman with a bundle and blistered feet, come to a white man's failing ranch asking for wages. And the first thing out of my mouth was the smallest thing I ever said. I got no work for your kind, I said. Try the Bar M east of here, they hire. And I used a word. I'm not going to write it down, even now. My ledger has a lot of ugly numbers in it, but I never wrote that word, and I'm not starting. She looked at me a long moment. Not hurt, I think she was past expecting better from a face like mine. Just tired. She nodded once, hitched her bundle up, and turned to walk back down the road she'd walked up, back into all those empty miles. And I sat there feeling like what I was. Here's the thing about a ledger, though. You keep one long enough and you can't hide from yourself. I looked down at my page, $11, 1 lame horse, 9 days, and I understood something with the cold clarity of a man who has run out of room to lie. I could not save this ranch alone. I had known it for weeks and refused to write it. And the one person in 100 miles who had walked up my road offering to try was the person I'd just turned away with the worst word I knew. My father, who'd built the place with his hands, and a Mexican partner named Reyes he'd have died for, would have been ashamed of me. He was ashamed of me. I could feel it coming off the barn he'd raised. Wait, my voice cracked on it. She didn't stop. I got up off the porch too fast, knocked the ledger into the dirt, and I went down the steps and out into the road after her, and I said it again, louder, and this time it came out like the plea it was. Wait, please. She stopped. She didn't turn around right away, and I understood that too. She was deciding whether I was worth turning around for. I was wrong, I said to her back, 3 words that cost me more than the $11. What I said, it was a coward's thing. I'm the truth is I got no money to pay you. That's the real reason, and I dressed it up in something uglier because I'm ashamed of it. Bank's taking this place in 9 days unless I can work a miracle I don't have the hands for. I stopped. That's the whole of it. I'm sorry for the rest. She turned around then, looked at me with eyes that had clearly measured worse men than me and found the exact size of them. You got no money, she repeated. No, but you got a ranch for 9 more days. For 9 more days. Something moved behind her face. Not softness, I'd never call it that. She wasn't a soft woman, and I'd be lying to make her one. Calculation. The same arithmetic I did every morning, running behind her eyes. She was doing sums of her own, and I didn't yet know what they were. My name's Ruth, she said. It wasn't the name her mother gave her. She told me that much later in the dark, the real name, and I keep it the way you keep the one thing in the house that would break if the world knew you had it. Ruth's the name they'll let me use in town. Elias, I said. Elias Crane. Well, Elias Crane. She set her bundle down in the road, slow, like a woman planting a flag. You're a fool and half a bigot, and you're 9 days from ruin. But you owned up to it, which most men can't. So let's talk about what you got and what I need and whether the two make a bargain. I picked my ledger up out of the dirt, brushed it off. And I want you to understand, I have made 3 good decisions in my whole life, and standing in that road listening instead of walking away was the first of them. We talked on the porch till the sun was high. What I had, 300 acres, most of it good grass gone to waste. A barn that needed a roof. A house that needed a woman's, no, that's the old lie, it needed someone's hand. 40 head of cattle scattered to the 4 winds because I hadn't the help to keep them gathered. A lame colt with promise if his foot healed. And 9 days before Harmon rode out from the bank in Tucson to foreclose on a note my father had signed and I had failed to pay down. What she had, everything I lacked, and a story I only got in pieces. She'd been at San Carlos, the reservation, though the Apache had another word for it, a word that meant something like the place they put us to disappear. Her husband had died there. Her boy, too, of the coughing sickness the winter before. She'd walked off it. You weren't supposed to, you needed a pass. An Apache off the reservation without paper was a hunted thing. Because staying meant watching the rest of her people die slow, and she had decided she would rather die walking. She'd been walking 3 weeks when she found my road. They'll come looking, I asked. My mouth was dry. Maybe I'm not worth the horse to send. 1 woman. She said it flat, but I saw the cost of saying it. A married woman, though. A married woman on a white man's ranch with a white man's name on a paper. That woman they might leave alone. That woman has a place they can point to and say, there, she belongs there, leave it. And that's when I understood the arithmetic behind her eyes. She didn't want my hand. She wanted my name, the shield of it, the one thing a broke bigot on a dying ranch still owned that was worth having. A marriage paper made her a rancher's wife instead of a runaway. It put a roof between her and the men who'd drag her back. And in return, she said, reading me because she was always 3 steps ahead of me and would be for 30 years, you get a partner who can actually run this place. I know cattle better than you do from the look of your corrals. I can gentle that colt. I can mend that fence and patch that roof and gather your 40 head, and I will work from dark to save this ground, because if it goes under, I go with it back to that place, or worse. So I've got more reason than you do to keep the bank off it. She held my eyes. It's not love, Elias Crane. Don't insult us both by pretending. It's arithmetic. You said you keep a ledger. Well, put us in it and tell me if the numbers work. I looked at her, I looked at my ledger. And God help me, the numbers worked. They worked better than anything had worked on that page in 2 years. But I'm a fool, like she said, and there was a thing in me that had already gone past arithmetic. Some fool tenderness that had started the moment she turned around in the road for a man who didn't deserve it. And so instead of saying yes, a fair bargain like a sensible man, I heard myself say the sentence that I would spend a lifetime failing to explain. The sun was already tipping west. She'd said it herself, a marriage paper and quick. And something in me wanted her to know it wasn't only the arithmetic, that she'd walked up to the lowest morning of my life and been better than I was, and I had seen it. Then marry me, I said, before sunset. Today, we ride to town now, we find the preacher, we do it before that sun's down. I swallowed. Not because I've got any right to ask, because you're right about the numbers, and because, I ran out of road on the sentence. Because I'd rather owe my ranch to you than to any bank. If it's going to be saved, I want it saved by you. She was quiet a long time. Long enough that I heard the whole yard, the wind in the dry grass. A jay somewhere, the colt shifting in his stall. The ridiculous ordinary sounds of a world that didn't know it was tilting. That's a lot of words, she said at last, for a man who had one ugly one ready this morning. I'm trying to be better than this morning. She picked up her bundle. For a second I was sure she'd walk, that I'd overplayed it, made it strange, made it more than a runaway woman wanted from a stranger. And I'd have deserved that, too. Instead she said, "Get your horse, the one that walks." And then, so quiet I almost missed it, already turning so I wouldn't see her face. "And Elias, if we do this, it's a true thing on paper and a promise between us, even if it's not the other thing. I've buried the man I loved. I'm not looking to replace him, and I won't have you thinking you can be him. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "Then we understand each other." She started for the barn. Stopped, said the last of it over her shoulder, and I wrote it in my ledger that very night so I'd never soften it in memory into something easier. "I'm not marrying you, Elias Crane. I'm marrying a chance. Try to be worth it." I saddled the horse that walked, and as we set out down that road toward town in a sun that had maybe 4 hours left in the sky, I did the only thing I knew how to do with a moment too big to hold. I did the arithmetic. 9 days to save the ranch. 4 hours to marry a stranger. One chance for both of us, walking side by side down a road that neither of us. The preacher married us at 6 minutes to sundown. I know it was 6 minutes because I looked, the way I look at everything. I counted the light left in the window of that little Tucson church, while a man named Reverend Poole read words neither of us fully meant and both of us fully needed. Ruth stood beside me in the striped blanket she'd carried up my road, her chin level, her eyes forward, and when Poole asked her the question, she said "I do" in a voice that gave nothing away. When he asked me, my voice broke on it like a boy's. She heard. She didn't look over, but her hand, when Poole said to take it, closed around mine with a steadiness that felt less like tenderness and more like a woman gripping a rope over a drop. We signed the paper, Elias Crane, Ruth Crane. She wrote the borrowed name in a careful hand, and I understood that every letter of it cost her something, that she was signing away a truer name to buy a false safety, and that she'd decided the trade was worth it and would not be pitied for it. Poole's wife gave us cornbread wrapped in a cloth. It was the only wedding supper we had, eaten on the ride home in the dark, passing it back and forth between 2 horses. I'd traded my pocket knife in town for a second mount, a sway-backed mare, because a rancher's wife walking behind a rancher's horse would have undone the whole disguise before we cleared the church steps. 6 minutes to spare, I said for something to say. "You count everything." "My father's habit." He said, "A man who won't write what he owes has already decided to lie about it." She said it before I could. "You told me, on the porch." A pause in the dark. "It's not a bad thing to believe, just a lonely one." I chewed cornbread and thought about that the rest of the way home. The next 8 days I will not soften. They were the hardest work of my life, and I had thought I knew hard work. Ruth knew this ground better in a day than I'd learned it in a year of feeling sorry for myself on the porch. She found where the cattle had scattered, read it off the land like I'd read a ledger. A bent stalk here, old droppings there, water they'd have gone to, and we gathered 31 head in 4 days, riding dark to dark, eating in the saddle, sleeping like the dead and rising before the birds. She gentled the lame colt. I want to tell you how, but I only half understood it. She didn't break him the way my father broke horses, with rope and exhaustion and a bent will. She sat in his corral for a whole evening doing nothing, just being a shape he got used to, and then the next evening a little closer, and by the third the colt came and put his lame foot practically in her lap like he was asking her to fix it. Which she did, a stone bruise, packed wrong, and she drew it and poulticed it with something from the hills she wouldn't name. Inside a week he walked sound. "Where'd you learn horses like that?" I asked her. "My husband," flat, a door closing. Then, because she was fair even about her own grief, she opened it a crack. "He was better than me, he could talk them out of anything. Our boy was going to be better than both of us." The crack closed again. She went back to the poultice. I wrote it in my ledger that night. Not the words, the fact of them. R spoke of the boy today, first time, did not push. I was learning the arithmetic of her silences, what each one cost, when to add to it and when to leave the column blank. On the 6th night, over supper, real supper now, she turned my sorry larder into something a man could live on, she said, not looking up. "We'll make the note." "What?" "The bank you're harmin'. I've counted it same as you." She'd taken to my ledger. I'd caught her reading it by lamplight, checking my sums, and once correcting one in the margin in a hand neater than mine. 31 head. If we drive them to the railhead and sell instead of holding for spring, we make the note and something over. It's a bad price and a worse time, and it's the smart thing, and you're going to hate it. I did hate it. Selling that many head at a summer price was a gutting. But she was right, and I was learning that she was usually right, and that the sensible move was to stop being surprised by it. "You'd save my father's ranch by selling my father's cattle," I said. "I'd save our ranch," she said, and it was the first time either of us had said the word that way, and she said it like arithmetic, and I heard it like a bell. "By keeping the ground and letting the cattle go. Ground you can't buy back. Cattle you can. Your father knew the difference, or he'd never have built anything." She looked at me. "Or is his pride worth more to you than his land?" It wasn't. She knew it wasn't. That was why she'd said it that way, to hand me the choice already made, so I could pick it up and think it was mine. We'd drive to the railhead on the 8th day. Harmon came the 9th. It was tight as 6 minutes to sundown, but it was a plan. And for the first time since the coal went gray at the edges, I felt something in my chest that wasn't dread. That was the night the men came. I heard the horses first, 3 of them, coming slow and deliberate up the road in the dark, which is a sound with no innocent meaning. Ruth was up before I was, and I saw in the lamplight that she'd gone somewhere behind her own face, somewhere flat and far, the place a person goes when they've rehearsed the worst thing so many times it arrives almost gently. "San Carlos," she said, "the agency sends men for the ones who walk off." She was already moving, not to run, I realized, but to stand where the lamp would show her. "They'll have a paper. They always have a paper. Mine says I'm property that walked away from where it was kept." "You've got a paper too now." "Yes," she looked at me, and for 1 second the flat far look cracked and I saw how frightened she was, how much she'd staked on a preacher's signature and a bigot's change of heart. "We'll see whose paper the world likes better." 3 men reined up in my yard. 2 were agency riders, hard men with the bored cruelty of people who hunt other people for wages. The third, the one who did the talking, was a heavy-set white man in a good coat, an Indian agent's man named Coffee, with a ledger of his own under his arm, which I have never forgiven ledgers for since. "Evening," Coffee said. "Looking for a Chiricahua woman, left San Carlos without a pass. Trailed her this direction." He looked past me at Ruth in the doorway, and his face did a thing I wanted to break. "There she is. Get your things, girl, you've cost me a week." I stepped off the porch. $11, a lame colt now sound, 31 head, and a paper. That was everything I owned in the world, and I put my body between all of it and that man. "This is my wife," I said. Coffee looked at me like I'd said something in a foreign tongue. "Come again." "Ruth Crane, my wife, married in Tucson, Reverend Poole officiating 8 days back, signed and witnessed." My voice was doing the steady thing now, the thing it wouldn't do at the altar. Funny, how a man can find his spine for someone else that he can't find for himself. "She's not property that walked off anything. She's a married woman on her husband's ranch, and your 3 men come to drag her off it in the dark." The agency riders shifted. One put a hand near his gun. Ruth said, very quiet behind me, "Elias," and it wasn't a plea, it was a warning, "Don't die for the paper. The paper's supposed to keep you from dying." Coffee opened his ledger, ran a fat finger down it. "I got her name here. I got a date she left. I got the law that says a reservation Indian off the reservation without a pass is mine to collect." He looked up. "You got a paper. Fine. Papers I can deal with. Take me a month, maybe 2, get a magistrate to weigh a marriage license against a federal removal order, and I don't much like your odds, but fine. Here's the other thing I got." He nodded, and one of the riders lifted his gun clear, not aiming it, just letting it be seen. "I got 2 men and the dark and a long way from any magistrate, so how about we save the month?" And there it was, the heavy thing, the choice with no clean side. I understood it complete, standing in my own yard. If I fought, I'd likely die, and Ruth would go back anyway, and the ranch would fall to Harmon on the 9th day for want of a living man to sign. If I didn't fight, if I stood there and let them take her, I kept my life and my land and my father's ground, and I bought it with her, traded her back to the place that had already taken her husband and her boy. And I would be exactly the man I'd been the first morning, the man with the ugly word ready, only worse, because this time I'd have known better and done it anyway. The arithmetic was clean, and I have never hated a sum more. I heard my father in the barn behind me. Not really, I know he was dead, but I heard him the way you hear the dead when a thing is being decided. And I thought about Ray's, his partner, the man he'd have died for, and I understood at last what that had meant. That there are debts you can't put in a ledger because they don't come in numbers. They come in whether you can live with yourself in the morning. No, I said. No, Coffee almost laughed. You heard the number wrong. My mouth was dry as the road she'd walked up. You think it's two men in the dark against one? It's not. I didn't have a plan. I want to be honest. This isn't the story where the ranchers got a rifle hid and a clever trick. I had $11 and a spine I'd found 8 days too late and nothing else. It's two men in the dark against a man defending his wife on his own land, which even out here is a thing you'll answer for. Because I know your agent's name now, Coffee. I heard it in town, and I keep a ledger too. And there's already a preacher and his wife in Tucson who witnessed this marriage and will remember 3 men rode out to break it. You can take her tonight, but you can't take that I'll have written it all down and mailed it and named you before you're back to the railhead. It was the thinnest bluff a man ever ran, but I said it the way she'd taught me to say a hard thing, flat and sure, and like the sum was already done. Coffee looked at me a long moment, weighing whether one Chiricahua woman was worth a paper trail and a magistrate, and his own name in some rancher's ledger going up the line to people who could make his easy job hard. One woman, he said at last, mostly to himself. The same words she'd used on the porch, the world's whole cruelty and how little she was worth to it, and for once that cruelty cut my way. He shut his ledger. She's not worth the ride. He reined his horse around. Over his shoulder, ugly to the last. You married a runaway, mister. Enjoy the trouble she'll bring you. They rode out slow, the way they'd come. I stood in the yard until I couldn't hear the horses. Then my legs did a thing I wasn't proud of, and I had to sit down on the porch step, hard, shaking like the colt with the stone bruise. Ruth sat down beside me, not touching but close. For a long time, neither of us said anything. The colt shifted in his stall. A jay that should have been asleep said something to the dark. You didn't have a plan, she said finally, not a question. No. You could have let them take me, kept the ranch clean, kept your life. Flat, testing, the arithmetic running behind her eyes the way it always did. Smart man does the sum and lets them take me. I did the sum, I said. That's the answer I got. She was quiet again, then so low I felt it more than heard it. My husband did a sum like that once, at San Carlos, stood between the agency men and a boy who'd stolen bread. A long breath. They didn't ride off for him. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything. I just sat there in the dark next to a woman who'd married a chance 8 days ago, and I let the silence be the column I left blank. After a while she stood. At the door she stopped, and without turning around, she always said the true things without turning around, so I couldn't reach for them, she said. You found your spine tonight, Elias Crane. A pause. Bit late for the morning you met me. But not too late for the rest of it. And then, quieter, the thing I wrote in my ledger last of all that night, under the shaking and the $11 and the sum I'd hated. Thank you, she'd never said it before. Now go to sleep. We drive to the railhead at dawn, and I won't have my husband falling off his horse because 3 fat men frightened him. My husband... She'd said it like arithmetic, but by then I knew her well enough to hear. We drove 31 head to the railhead in a day and a half, and I learned more about my wife in those hours than in the 8 days before. She rode point like she'd been born to it. Read the herd's mood off the set of their ears, turned a near stampede at a dry wash with nothing but her voice and the flat of her hand, sang to them low in a language I didn't know when they got fretful at the dark, Chiricahua words, I think, the first of her own tongue I'd heard her use out loud, and she didn't stop when she saw me listening, which I took as the gift it was. She'd stopped hiding pieces of herself from me somewhere back in that yard with Coffee. Not all of them, but some. At the railhead the buyer was a thief, the way railhead buyers are, and offered us a price that made my teeth ache. I opened my mouth to take it. 9 days had made a beggar of me. And Ruth put her hand flat on the corral rail beside mine, not touching, just there, and said to the buyer, mild as milk. There's a second buyer at the Tucson pens. We passed him. He's short 40 head for a contract, and it's Thursday. She let that sit. We can sell you 31 at your price and let him wonder, or you can pay us his price minus your trouble and we don't ride the extra day and everybody sleeps. She smiled. I'd never seen her smile at a stranger, and it wasn't warm, it was a blade with the light on it. I don't much care which. We kept these cattle alive through a dry summer. We can keep them alive another week. There was no second buyer. She'd invented him whole out of the dust, the way I'd invented my mailed letter in the yard. I understood then that she'd taught me that trick on purpose, back with Coffee, that she'd been handing me her own weapons one at a time to see if I'd learn to use them. We got the better price. Rode home with the note money knotted in a cloth inside her blanket, because a woman's bundle was the last place a robber looked and she knew it. "You're a dangerous person to play cards with," I said. "I don't play cards. Cards are for people who have money to lose." A beat. "I play the only game they ever let me play, the one where you have nothing and you make them believe you have something." She looked out at the dark ground rolling by. "You'd be surprised how far nothing gets you if you hold it right." I wrote that in my ledger. I've read it 1,000 times since. Harmon came on the 9th day, as promised, riding out from Tucson in a black coat with foreclosure papers in his saddlebag, and the comfortable face of a man who has done this many times and slept fine after. He found a working ranch. I don't say that to make it sound like more than it was. It was still a poor place, sagging barn, thin larder, a colt just barely sound. But there was smoke from the chimney and washing on the line, and 31 head sold clean, and there was a woman at the well who looked at Harmon the way she'd looked at coffee, and there was me on the porch, and I want to tell you I stood up straight for once. "Mr. Crane," Harmon dismounted, "you'll have heard why I've come." "I have." I held up the cloth. $211, the note's $190 and the back interest. That covers it and something over. You'll want to count it. I'll want a receipt in your hand and my ledger. Harmon's comfortable face did a small, unhappy thing. He'd ridden out to take a ranch, not a payment. But he counted the money twice, the second time slow, looking for a way it wouldn't be enough, and it was enough. And he wrote the receipt because a banker who won't honor a paid note is a banker who won't be one long. He glanced at Ruth on his way to his horse, glanced at me. Did the arithmetic men like him did. "That your wife?" "That's my wife." "Chiricahua." "Crane," I said, "Ruth Crane. It's on a paper, too, if you want to see it. I know how you people like a paper." Harmon almost smiled. He wasn't a cruel man, just a comfortable one, and comfortable men can be shamed where cruel ones can't. "No need," he mounted, looked out over the ground he'd come to take and hadn't. "You had this place written off in my book, Crane. 2 weeks ago I'd have bet the note you'd not make it to today." 2 weeks ago you'd have won," I said. "Something changed." He followed my eyes to the well, nodded slow like a man revising a sum, and rode off my land for good. I would like to tell you the rest was easy. It wasn't. Nothing about that ground was ever easy, and nothing about us was either. The trouble coffee promised came, in its way, the whispers in town, the merchant who wouldn't sell to the Crane place anymore, the 2 riders who ran off 4 of our new calves that fall and dared us to name them. Ruth carried the weight of it worse than I did, because she carried it in her skin, in every store she couldn't enter and every road she couldn't ride alone. There were nights she sat by the fire gone flat and far, back at San Carlos in her head, back with the man who'd stood between the agency and a boy with stolen bread and not been ridden off for. I learned to leave that column blank, to sit near and not reach, to be a shape she got used to, the way she'd been for the colt. And slow, so slow I couldn't tell you the day it turned. And I keep a ledger, I keep track of days. The arithmetic became the other thing. It wasn't a lightning strike. It wasn't the story where the marriage of convenience turns to a kiss in the rain. It was smaller and truer than that. It was her correcting my sums in the margin in her neat hand. It was me learning the words to the song she sang the cattle, and singing it wrong on purpose so she'd laugh. She had a real laugh buried deep, and I made it my life's work to mine it out. It was the winter I took the coughing sickness, the same that took her boy, and I watched her decide whether she could survive nursing another person through that particular dark. And she did it, she stayed. She pulled me through it with the poultices and the flat far look, and one night, when my fever broke, her hand in my hair and her voice saying the real name, her name, the one the world would break if it knew she had, and me not letting on I was awake enough to hear it, so she could give it to the dark and not to me. Years by, it took years, and I'm not going to pretend I earned it fast or clean. I was half a bigot in a road one August morning, and it took a long time to sweat all of that out of a man. She watched me do it. She never once told me I'd finished. But there was an evening, the light going long and gold across the yard the way it had the day we married, the colt grown into a good horse in the corral, the barn re-roofed by our own hands, and I was on the porch with my ledger, and she came and sat beside me. Close. Touching now, years of touching now. And she looked at the page where I was doing the evening's arithmetic. Feed, water, weather, the small deaths and smaller mercies. And she put her finger on the top of the page where I always wrote the date and the count. "You still count the days?" she said. "Habit." "To what? There's no harm in coming. No 9 days." She was teasing, but under it she was asking a real thing, the way she always tucked the real things under the small ones. I looked at the page, at all the days behind it. At the first one, Aug 14. Days till Harmon, 9, and the ugly word I hadn't written, and the sum I'd hated, and the 6 minutes to sundown, and the blank columns I'd learned to leave. "I stopped counting down a long time ago," I said. "Round about the day you rode point and turned that herd at the wash, I count up now." "Up to what?" And here is the thing I have never been able to say right, though I've had all these years to practice, though I keep a ledger precisely so the true things won't soften in memory into something easier. I looked at her, my wife, who'd married a chance and been failed by it 100 small ways and stayed anyway, who'd taught me every weapon I had by handing them over one at a time to see if I'd learn, who'd given her real name to the dark of a sick room because she couldn't yet give it to the day. "Up," I said. "Just up. Every day I get is one more than the ledger said I'd have. I stopped needing them to add to anything. They're just—" I ran out of road on the sentence the way I did that first day, the way I always did when the thing was too big to hold. "They're just days I got to keep with you in them. I quit doing the sum. Turns out some things you're not supposed to." She didn't say anything for a while. The light went longer, gold to amber. The colt that was a horse blew softly in the corral. Somewhere a jay that should have been asleep said it's one thing to the coming dark, the way one had the night I found my spine 8 days too late, the way one always seemed to at the moments that mattered, like the world kept one bird on staff just to witness us. Then Ruth took the pencil out of my hand, turned the ledger toward herself, and in her neat hand, neater than mine at the bottom of the day's page, under the feed and the water and the weather, she wrote 3 words. I watched her write them. She didn't say them out loud. She never said the truest things out loud. She wrote them or gave them to the dark or tucked them under a smaller thing. And she didn't turn to see my face when I read them, because after all those years, she still knew to give me the true things sideways so I couldn't reach for them and make them smaller by holding on too hard. I'm not going to write here what she wrote. Some columns you leave blank on purpose. My father was wrong about one thing. A man who won't write down what he owes isn't always lying. Sometimes the debt is too large for the page, and the only honest thing is the space where the number should go.